I know a lot of people that watch my content are really interested in the idea of fantasy Overwatch, like fantasy football, but with points scored for eliminations and minus for deaths, this kind of stuff. But for the Overwatch League. The Overwatch League 2020 season is just about to begin, and so if you're gonna start one and you want the full experience, you might as well start now. I would highly recommend a new app called Draft Buff, who are sponsoring this video. It's a very well-made fantasy Overwatch app. It's got a bunch of different features on it, and it's incredibly easy to use. You can even auto draft if you want to. So go and set up a league, have some fun with your friends. There's no hidden fees, no gambling or anything like that. It's just good social fun with your friends to see who's the best Overwatch analyst. It's obviously me, but don't worry, you can play at it as well. The link is in the description, so go check it out, and thanks again to DraftBuff for supporting this video. Now, the meat of what I want to talk about today, what a lot of people have been asking me, is this hero pools idea that's just come into the league. But not just into the league, into Overwatch itself, into the game. And it's not going to drop right now. It's in the PTR at the moment, but it's set to arrive on March the 7th. But it's such an enormous change to the game that it really does justify a big breakdown. So I can't anticipate this being a short video, honestly. I mean, only you will know how long this video lasts. I can't see into the future. But I know you might think, okay, Josh, your analysis, your predictions, they're so good. Really? You're telling me you can't see into the future? But unfortunately, no, that's just my enormous brain. So Jeff put out this developer update, right? Talking about how they were going to aggressively tackle the meta when balancing. So instead of balancing, I've referenced this before in a bunch of tweets that I had. The developer team previously was balancing kind of for the good of the game, trying to make it as stable and balanced as possible. A very hard task, one which I'm sure various people would argue they've been either good or bad at. But they're going to change their philosophy. They're now going to directly try and tackle the meta or perceptions of what the meta is with their balance. And they introduce this idea of hero pools. So the meta changes are all great. Love it. Love the idea. I think that just being aggressive towards the meta fixes both the imbalance which is present at the higher levels and the perception of imbalance which is prevalent at the lower levels, and is the reason why a lot of people feel, you know, like forced to play Orisa or forced to play Mercy or whatever the meta requires at the time. I think this is a great thing. But hero pools are where all of the discussion is, because it's arguably unnecessary, arguably against competitive integrity, arguably an incredible change for the game, which will make viewers way more excited to watch the Overwatch League and to play the game itself. There's a lot of contrasting, contradictory opinions, so I really want to go through a lot of it in detail and pick these things apart rather than just doing a cursory first impression. That's why I waited with my video. So first of all, just want to say, straight off the bat, hero pools. Why'd you call it hero pools, Jeff? We already had the term hero pools. It meant the heroes that a player can play to a reasonable level. That was their hero pool. Now we have to talk about their hero pools and whether or not they're viable within this hero pool. It's nonsense. Now we have to find a new term for the heroes that people can play at a top level. Why have you done this to me, Jeff? Why do you make my life hell? Why? Okay, with that out of the way, let's actually start analyzing the information. So this is all information from publicly available, you know, posted stuff like the developer update and Jeff's post on forums and stuff like that. I'm not hitting you with any behind the scenes info, so if you're expecting, you know, leaks or insight into how the league is going to manage things, that's not the video for this. I'm just giving my opinion on what's publicly available. So, what is this change with hero pools? It's a weekly rotation of available heroes, essentially, right? Like, they're going to make some heroes unavailable. 1 tank, 1 support, and 2 damage heroes are going to be available. And as it applies to the Overwatch League, they're going to be unavailable for only 1 weekend, right? So that's 2 homestands that they're going to be unavailable for, that are happening simultaneously. Those heroes, the 1 tank, 1 support, and 2 damage heroes, are going to be randomly selected from a group of eligible heroes. The group of eligible heroes, we don't know how big it is, by the way. No information on that. And that is crucial, and I'll get to that later. But this group of eligible heroes is based on play rate data from the previous 2 weeks of Overwatch League matches. Right? That's, again, this is all really crucial information, because anyway, I'll get to why it's crucial later on when I actually run through each thing line by line. No hero can be unavailable 2 weeks in a row, right? Fairly obvious. That's just a good way of doing it anyway. But because the play rate data is based on the previous 2 weeks, it's very unlikely that you'll get Orisa banned, then Wrecking Ball banned, then Orisa banned again. Because the 2 weeks of data, one of those weeks, if they've been banned, you would have to have like basically 100% playtime in that 1 week where they're available. Otherwise, your play rate data is not going to make you eligible for the pool. So it seems likely that we're going to get different heroes banned each week. There is a random element, of course, that could be the same kind of stuff, but it seems like it's going to be ever changing. Now, Overwatch League put out a post where they said the aims of the rule were to improve quality of play. I don't even know what that means. I'm going to be straight real with you. I don't know what it means. I could argue against that, but I think it's such a nothing point that I'm not even going to bother. I'm gonna get to whether or not I think the skill level of the game and like team coordination and stuff like that increases or decreases later on in the video. But as for improved quality of play, I don't even know what it means. Increase hero diversity. That's another aim of the rule. Okay, interesting aim. Seems like the meta changes would go some way to solving that anyway. But okay, I like this hero pool idea. It's certainly the purpose that it most obviously fulfills is hero diversity and avoiding getting stuck in stagnant metas, which is good for viewership, or at least is expected to be good for viewership. And to increase strategy. I am going to get into that later on, because although improved quality of play is a bit of a nothing statement, increased strategy is a big goal, and one that there are debates on both sides. There have been people like Avast came out and said, okay, now it's time for coaches to actually step up and earn their money. You know, coaches are now going to be really important. There's a lot of other people, including most former players that I've talked to, say that basically they're expecting the coaches to have little impact because the more of what you're doing in the game is going to be unexpected and on the fly, so it's more down to the players to adapt rather than the coaches. It actually takes weight off the coaches in some sense, or not weight off, it's not less work, but it's they can do less, they have less impact in what actually happens in the game. Anyway, we'll get into that. Teams are informed of this selection, 1 tank, 1 support, 2 damage heroes. Teams are informed of that approximately 1 week before the matches. Now, I'm going to dig into this a little bit more, and again, no inside knowledge, but presumably they're going to be told on the Sunday after the matches happen. Because if they're based on 2 weeks of pick rate data from the Overwatch League, one of those weeks will finish on the Sunday when those matches conclude from the homestand. So they can't tell them before the games are finished on Sunday, presumably, right? So late on Sunday, or possibly early Monday, depending on where you are in the world, the teams will presumably be informed. So they have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 5 days, and then they play their match on Saturday. So approximately 1 week actually ends up being 5 days of 5 usable days of scrimming and theory crafting and this kind of stuff. So that is, I mean, the difference between 5 and 7 days is actually quite a lot. It might not seem like it, but that's a huge portion of the week, the weekend, that's just been a little bit fluffed over here. And it's starting on March 7th, week 5 of the Overwatch League. It's like Washington and Seoul, I believe, are the homestands that week, because it's being aligned with the ranked season 21. So the rule is not going to be used for mid-season tournament, for the play-ins, for the playoffs, for the grand finals. These big games, they're going to allow every hero to be available. So that's another interesting wrinkle to this rule. How big is this? Right? I think it is potentially the biggest change that Overwatch has made. And some people might find that ridiculous when there's Hero Limit 1 and Roll Lock are the other 2 big ones. For me, Hero Limit 1 is obviously a huge change, but it wasn't really a change. It was what everyone thought and wanted the game to be. It wasn't like this was some deviation from a path that was expected. Hero Limit 1 was absolutely mandated by the people. So that was an enormous change, but it wasn't so much a shift in direction for Overwatch. Role lock was undoubtedly enforced the game to go down a certain path, but again, it wasn't really a change that much. Sure, it was a change from GOATs and from triple DPS, but apart from GOATs, the game had basically been played as 2-2-2 for the majority of the time. There was a bit of triple DPS being played for a time in 2017. There was a bit of quad tank for like a few months, but broadly speaking, from 2016 up until 2019, or up until the end of 2018, the game had been 2-2-2. So it more brought it in line with community expectations of what the game should be, rather than deviated the path. This, I feel, is quite a large deviation. This is fundamentally different to how the game has ever been played before. The big design philosophies of the Overwatch League team, of stuff like, if you are a player that likes to play certain heroes, you should be able to play those heroes. That's kind of been a guiding philosophy of the Overwatch League, is that they don't want to necessarily cater to one-trick people, but they know that there are people out there who are in love with certain heroes that are Genji, Widowmaker players, or they like to play Mercy and Moira. There are players out there, a lot of players, casual players, I mean, that identify with certain heroes, and I think that has always been a driving factor to bring players into the game. They identify with the characters and with their backgrounds and with the story behind them, and with the method of how you play them. And so this is actually quite a big change to start making heroes unavailable for play in the game itself. Jeff put out a forum post where he said he doesn't think it's that big a change. He said, and I want to quote this, "Oddly, we're not viewing this change as dramatic, scary, or impactful as the decision to pursue hero limits or our decision to implement role queue." So he thinks it isn't as big as hero limits or role queue. And the big reason for this is that Hero Pools is being introduced for Season 21 of competitive play only. It's not being introduced to all the other modes in the game. It doesn't fundamentally change how the game is played, it changes how ranked is played. So that's a big difference for Jeff from the developer point of view. But that doesn't really affect us. The people that I'm talking to right now, people who, like me, are coming at it from an Overwatch League kind of point of view or playing competitive, I mean, that has changed the majority of the modes that I play, spectate, watch. That to me is Overwatch. I know that it isn't the entirety of Overwatch, but for a lot of people in our community, that is Overwatch. Ranked and Overwatch League is your experience with Overwatch. So that's where the difference in opinion comes from, I believe. He also said, though, and I want to quote again, "We are super open to change with hero pools. If we, the dev team and the community, don't feel like it's a positive change during Season 21, then we won't bring it back in Season 22. That is a huge sentence in and of itself. And the repercussions for the Overwatch League are really interesting, actually. If hero pools ended up being something that the community hated for Season 21, then Jeff has literally posted on the forums and said that it is possible that they wouldn't implement it for Season 22. Now, just from my own gut feeling, I think it would have to be an unmitigated disaster for them to do that, because you want to give it at least a little bit of time to fully flesh out, for people to get comfortable with it, this kind of stuff. You want to give people a chance to acclimatize to it. So, but even the fact that they're putting that out there gives this experimental vibe, and they're actually introducing an experimental thing to the game later on, but I won't get into that. So if it wasn't brought back for Season 22, presumably the Overwatch League would also revert. So this is a big period of experimentation for the Overwatch League itself. It's not so much that this is a new direction for the league, that this is just them following on, trying to keep the game as closely aligned with, trying to keep the league as closely aligned with the core game as possible. And because the core game is going to have heroes unavailable in ranked, so is the Overwatch League. He also said that they could change the amount of heroes that are banned, the time that they're banned for, this kind of stuff. So I've got some feedback on it that we'll get to later on. The classic piece of feedback that you hear from all of the players and coaches is just 1 week prep is very low. If they were banned for 2 weeks and you had 2 weeks of prep for those second games, I think a lot of coaches and players would be a little happier with that. But things would get shaken up less quickly, so there's a positive and a negative both ways there. But Jeff has said that they're open to making changes about it. It's not something that's absolutely locked in stone. But there are a few things that we can take away from this. One, that the idea itself is something that's going to be iterated on. But two, the hero pools in Overwatch League are presumably not going to be the same as the hero pools in Ranked. Because Overwatch League put out a statement saying that they were going to be balanced based on Overwatch League pick rate, and the developer team is talking about ranked pick rate. So the heroes that are banned, as far as I can see, are probably going to... the heroes that are going to be unavailable are probably going to be different from Overwatch League to ranked. So the core game itself is going to have a different meta that you play compared to that you watch. This has always been a big no-no for Overwatch, but for the sake of variety, they are definitely moving in this direction at the moment. So let's dig into some of the specifics a little deeper. The biggest question I have, frankly, is how many heroes get put in this eligible pool based on play rate, because that changes things a lot. If there are only, let's say tanks, right? You're going to make one tank unavailable for a weekend of the Overwatch League. And I'm going to use Overwatch League as my example here because I'm an Overwatch League analyst. That's the thing that I care about the most. You're going to make one tank unavailable. How many tanks do you put in that pool to randomly select from? If you put 5 tanks in the pool, then there's a fairly strong chance that the one that is randomly selected did not have that much playtime. If you put in 3 tanks in the pool, then they probably all had a pretty decent amount of playtime, but you could definitely pick a tank out of that pool randomly that was not affecting the meta. Let me give you an example just to really make it a little clearer. For the playoffs, everyone was playing Orisa, Sigma, and then if you weren't playing Orisa and Sigma, I think someone might have played like D.Va at some point or something. Let's just say D.Va. I can't exactly remember the pick rate data for tanks in the playoffs last year, but it was Orisa, Sigma, and then something else. But let's say it was Orisa, Sigma, D.Va. If there are 3 heroes that get put in this eligible pool based on pick rate and randomly selected from, if it was Orisa, Sigma, D.Va, there is a 33% chance, assuming that they're just literally randomly picking based on... They're not picking based on the pick rate, right? Which is something else that you could do. If you see a 50% playtime for Orisa and a 30% playtime for Wrecking Ball, you could make it so that you have a 30% chance of picking Wrecking Ball out of there and a 50% chance of picking Orisa. That is another way that you could do it. They haven't released details of how they're going to pick. There are many ways to randomly pick. It doesn't have to be 33% chance with 3 things. But let's assume it is. Let's assume that it's just like names out of a hat, right? If it was names out of a hat, there is a 33% chance that you are going to pick D.Va to be the tank that is banned in the playoffs, which does absolutely nothing for the meta. I mean, it does perhaps worse than nothing, because it then stops you introducing any variation to the Orisa Sigma tank line, because the only viable option would have been a D.Va, and you are now unavailable. That hero is now unavailable. The tighter you make the eligible pool, the smaller you make the pool based on pick rate, the higher chance you have of picking something that will genuinely affect the meta. So the amount of heroes that they put into this selection to randomly pick from makes a big difference, and I would be interested to know what size that is, and presumably it is different for supports, for tanks, and for DPS, because there are different amounts of each in the game. So I've spoken a little bit about how the hero pools change might not actually have an effect at all. Because of the random element, there is a chance that you can pick out heroes that don't affect the meta in the slightest. And the PTR patch that I think it dropped yesterday or something, I saw some posts on Reddit and on Twitter. I haven't actually launched the game, I want to say that, but I saw posts on Reddit and on Twitter about how originally it was like Wrecking Ball was banned with Genji and with Batiste or something like that, and then they swapped it over for some unknown reason, so that Soldier 76, Lucio, and something else was banned. Basically, the pick rates in-game, because they're using global pick rates, are not really indicative of what the meta is. That will be different to ranked. Different to OWL. In the Overwatch League, pick rates and the meta are closely aligned. The heroes that are picked a lot are the heroes that are the best, are the heroes that dominate and cause the meta. In ranked, that's not the case. So in ranked, it's going to be a crapshoot what gets banned. But because ranked is basically a crapshoot anyway, I don't think it'll make an enormous difference. And I want to be clear here. The fact that the hero pools change might not have a big difference on the meta is both a positive and a negative. It's a positive in the sense that some people have been crazily against this change, this hero pools change, on the basis that it will ruin competitive integrity. On the basis that having heroes randomly banned from the pool will just introduce chaos. It'll randomly make some teams better some weeks and other teams better the other week. It'll reduce all strategy, all of this kind of stuff. Those people should, I think, sit down a little bit and really think how much difference they expect this change to make. I don't think this change will uproot the meta every single week. I just don't think it's feasible because of the random element involved. So I don't think, if you view the hero pools change as a bad change, then think to yourself, how much effect does this actually have? The answer is probably not an enormous amount, and therefore it's not the end of the world. If you think the hero pool change is bad for the game or bad for the Overwatch League, it's not the end of the world because there are limiting factors in place. If you think it's a good thing for the game, then it probably won't affect things every single week, churning chaos. But it will have some small effect to shake up the meta, to introduce some variety. And I think the middle ground that they found, depending on how big this amount of heroes that gets put in the pool, I think that's pretty good. I think that it should have some effect, but not an enormous effect. Another question to ask here, though, is that, okay, some hero is banned in this composition. Let's take the current, what we thought might be meta coming into the Overwatch League 2020. Orisa, Sigma, Mei, Hanzo with Batiste Zen. Let's say that is your meta. You get it all the time in every game. Let's just pretend. Then we get a week where Hanzo is banned. And so is Zen. It's not that they were the most broken heroes, but they got put in the pool along with a bunch of other stuff, and they happened to get randomly selected. This, I think, is not me coming up with some crazy example. I think this is what's quite likely to happen. Some weeks you will get Orisa, Sigma not Orisa and Sigma, but some weeks you will get Orisa is banned, which hugely changes up the composition because it's the cornerstone of that composition. Some weeks you will get heroes that are unavailable that they're not cornerstones, they're replaceable. And I think that the pro players and their coaches will not always change compositions drastically. They will sub in replacement heroes. So if Hanzo is out of the hero pool, then maybe Widowmaker gets played. Maybe if you don't want the sniping, but you do want the shield break, maybe McCree gets played or Ash gets played, something in the middle ground. I think there are many scenarios in which the composition itself is not broken by hero pools. You just see a replacement hero. Is this a good thing? Is the obvious question. I think it is good because you get to see different heroes pop into place. You don't always see the same support lines, the same DPS lines. Even if the composition and style is the same, you get to see a little bit of variation, at least, in how teams attack it. But the fact that it doesn't change things up massively, you're still going to be relying on the dev team to hit with regular meta-breaking patch changes. That's still going to be the more powerful punch rather than hero pools in order to shake things up in a lot of situations, I think. So I think the random element, as horrific as it sounds to some people, because random equals chaos equals lack of competitive integrity, I think the random element could be called good for the game, because it limits the effect of this hero pools change. And it means that sometimes you will have truly cornerstone heroes getting banned and brand new compositions coming out, and sometimes you will get replacement heroes that are just a fun little sprinkle of spice. A lot of the arguments, though, between the lovers and the haters of this change come down to basically one fact. Is this hero pools change necessary to make Overwatch and Overwatch League more interesting for players and viewers? Because if it is necessary, then it must happen. You must be in favor of it. If it's not necessary, then you could definitely argue that it's just messing around with the game, introducing chaos, making things less strategic, and much more random, throwing competitive integrity out the window. These kind of things, the kind of things that, like Volumel, for example, has been saying on the Tactical Crouch podcast. So is this a necessary change to make the game more interesting? Nobody wants another season of GOATs or anything that resembles that. Another season of everybody playing the same composition and very similar styles, because one style is the best way of playing the composition. Nobody wants that. It's not fun to watch. It's not fun to analyze. It's fun to analyze specific excellent teams when that happens, and it's fun to watch the absolute best teams in the world be good at that, because they're good enough to develop their own styles. The Batiste GOATs, the excellent Sombra GOATs we saw from some teams, the difference between NYXL's defensive reactive style and Vancouver Titans' crazy aggression. Those are great. Those are fantastic to watch. I love that. Maybe the average viewer doesn't appreciate it quite as much as a hardcore fan or an analyst or a coach, but okay, it's entertaining. You can't argue that it's not. The Vancouver Titans versus Shock final with GOATs versus GOATs in Stage 2 was the most watched game we've ever had in the Overwatch League. So that's undeniably good, entertaining play. The storylines that come out of it, all this kind of stuff. But it is shite to watch bad teams flounder at a meta that they are clearly not capable at, that their team was never developed for, and just with no end in sight. Like, you're just watching the Justice just batter their heads against this brick wall, knowing that the meta's not going to change, that this team is going to continue to flounder, that every game, whenever they pop up, they're just going to be the entertainment thieves, just stealing away your half hour to 2 hours to watch them lose. Nobody wants that. The debatable part comes when you say, would the developers be able to make the game change, to make the pro teams change their compositions over the course of 2020 just by balancing the game? And I think you look back at 2018 and 2019, especially when the developers were actively trying to change people off GOATs in 2019, there was a huge balance change at the end of Stage 2 that we thought would shake things up. Actually, I think that was at the end of Stage 1. The change where Lucio's speed boost got reduced, Discord got reduced, this kind of stuff. I think that was at the end of stage 1. It didn't do a thing. Like, it really didn't do a thing. In stage 3, we started to see things open up a little bit, but that was also because teams were anticipating the end of the GOATS comp, so they had no interest in continuing to try and get good at the GOATS comp because they knew it was going to end. So just the very fact that meta is changing more often allows teams to experiment more rather than trying to specialize in what the best composition is. So there is a strong argument to be made that this was a necessary change for making the game interesting for viewers. I wish we lived in a world where it wasn't a necessary change, that either people enjoyed the perfection element of watching the best composition be played to its absolute best degree. I personally wish that more people were a bit like me and didn't enjoy random chaotic compositions that much that are difficult to spectate and watch, but people do. People enjoy that. People like the pop-off heroes. They like the pop-off moments. They like a little bit of randomness in their matches, the Chengdu Hunters spicing things up. They enjoy that. And I think that I tend to come down on the side of, I think this will be a good thing for viewers moving forwards. But there's always this little part of me that argues too much randomness is not fun. Even for viewers that loved the Chengdu Hunters. If everybody was the Chengdu Hunters, then it just makes the whole league seem random. And it comes back to this argument about creativity that I've thought about quite a lot over a long time, actually. Creativity itself is not chaos. Creativity requires structure in order to demonstrate itself. In order for somebody or some team, something to be creative, there must be a recognized structure to break out of. In order to think outside of the box, there must first be a box. And if the compositions and the teams and the strategies are changing week to week in large ways, then you will not be able to tell which teams are creative, because every team will be required to try a bunch of different stuff and just see what works. You'll be able to see which teams are organized, synergistic. You'll be able to see which players are very skilled. You'll be able to see which teams are good at adapting on the fly, but you won't get that flash of creativity. The amazing stuff like Batiste Goats, like Rascal just coming out and being fantastic at that. It required the viewer to expect Goats to recognize that Batiste Goats was really interesting, or Sombra Goats, or Doomfist Sombra, or whatever the hell. For stage 3, when we all loved seeing the Shanghai Dragons win with their triple DPS, it was so interesting because it was so different to what the other teams in the league were playing. If everybody is playing weird shit, then you can't stand out with weird shit, except by winning. And you already could stand out by winning anyway. So you're just losing this creative aspect if things become truly random. Now, for reasons that I've stated previously about the hero pool's limitations and the fact that I don't think it'll have a huge effect, I don't think that we're going for complete randomness. I think that we're going for a bit more random, a bit more chaos, but I think you will still be able to see creativity. But I just wanted a little tangent there to explain to people why true randomness and constantly changing metas, I don't think would genuinely be fun to watch, because you would lose that creativity. Think the most famous example of this actually is the Great Bamboozle by the LA Gladiators when they were playing at the end of the playoffs in 2018, right? Wait, am I going crazy? Yeah, that was the playoffs at the end of 2018. This team was all set up to play the GOATS composition on King's Row, and creatively went around the back of King's Row, pushed the opposing team of London Spitfire onto the point, and then had Surefour pop them, hide and spawn and pop them with the Widowmaker. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's absolutely iconic. It's the best play, probably strategic play anyway, that we've ever seen in the Overwatch League. But it required some things in order to make it that good. It required the expectation that they were playing GOATs. If London had no idea what gladiators were coming out of the gates with, they would not have reacted in a predictable way, and gladiators wouldn't have been able to predict their reaction and react themselves accordingly, or prepare themselves accordingly. They also probably wouldn't have had time to come up with a niche strategy like that in the current system, because you only have a week to prepare. So I think it will be a loss if we go towards full chaos, because you won't get those beautiful moments. As for strategy, especially niche strategies like that, I think it will kill quite a lot of them. I personally love seeing well-executed rotations, teamwork between individuals on a team to be able to, like, the creative ways in which people were able to cover their mercies when they went for resurrects, rotations around maps to force people onto low grounds. What you think back to the 2018 metas and the dive compositions that we had, there were some beautifully executed Tracer and Winston plays that had taken hours and hours and hours, days and days and days, weeks of grinding to be able to get to that kind of level. Those things will not be feasible this year, I think, because the coaches will be scrambling so much to try and figure out the best compositions to play with the current hero pool that they won't have the time to actually work out the details. I think we're going to lose a lot of detail this year, but we're going to gain a lot of cheese comps. This is a positive or a negative depending on how you feel about cheese comps, but you bet your ass you're getting a lot of cheese this year. If there's a certain hero band, like say Brigitte and McCree are banned, then Tracer suddenly becomes much more feasible. Say Soldier and McCree are unavailable. That makes Pharah much more feasible, especially if D.Va is also out of the mix. Basically, if D.Va is out of the mix, then Pharah becomes much more available as well, because D.Va is the best Pharah counter. And I know that people will be saying hit scan, but if your team plays around the Pharah really well, you can neutralize the hit scan. It's much harder to neutralize a D.Va when they can stay in the air the entire time. So there's a lot of ways in which you can cheese by taking advantage of the unavailable heroes and trying to figure out what's the best composition to play now that the hard counters or soft counters are unavailable. But there's also just cheese strategies in terms of this. Most teams in the league are not going to have that much time to prepare. So if you throw something weird at them and you know that team doesn't adapt well, you're going to win, because they just won't be able to adapt to you and they're going to crumble. So the Chengdu Hunters effect is going to be en masse this year. Lots of cheese comps all over the place. Lots of cheesy heroes like the Bastion being played, I would anticipate. Big rotations around with people to try and catch people unawares. Wrecking Ball stuff to try and cheese. A lot of May walls and stuff like that. I like watching that, honestly. I mean, I don't like watching Bastion so much because it's fairly boring and, you're just waiting to see whether the other team can do anything about it. But I do like the other, a little more interesting, creative cheese comps. And just because there is a way of countering it that the enemy team hasn't come up with, doesn't reduce my enjoyment of watching them succeed with the cheese comp. Just because it's not the best composition, I still enjoy it. Hopefully there'll be enough time to come up with creative cheese comps and not just boring or ridiculous ones. So I think that the idea of strategy is going to differ. This entire hero pool rule trades perfection, mastery, strategy, teamwork. Those things get lowered a lot. But in exchange, you get variety, diversity of heroes, cheese compositions, and excitement, probably, as well, for your average viewer. Here's some concerns, though. Specialists. A lot of teams built their rosters around certain specialists this year. I've seen Fion on Fire, for example, talk about how he thinks that specialists are going to be valuable this year, because if you have certain heroes unavailable, then it becomes a really good opportunity for Chipser to flex his Doomfist, or for Ants to flex his Widowmaker. But because you can't prepare for that very much in advance, I don't think that's the case. I think it's much more likely that specialists are very useless this season. Maybe they pop in for a very small amount of time, but you're not going to get much value out of it. I think that that's not great. I enjoy seeing specialists used in the right situations. When Pine was subbed in to play a specific aggressive strategy, I fucking loved it. When Shock would rotate their B team in to play Bastion compositions, because they had much more time to be able to prep that, I fucking loved it. I think that that's fantastic. I think the opportunities for specialists to get used introduce a lot of excitement, because they create anticipation. You know what that guy is known for. You know that he's excellent at that hero, and you are anticipating it as a viewer. Your mouth salivates in expectation of Pine destroying the opponents before he's even stepped on stage. Just the knowledge that he's about to be subbed in is exciting. So I think that that is going to be a large reduction in fun in that aspect this year. I also think that it's going to be hard to really piece together big storylines. It was easy, but perhaps a little boring with storylines last year. You had two teams, Vancouver Titans, San Francisco Shock, and then NYXL as number 3. They were your big 3 the entire year long. Then you had a big upset potential in stage 3. The Shanghai Dragons came in. There was the Hangzhou Spark and the LA Valiant even looking pretty good in stage 3. LA Valiant Redemption Arc, this kind of stuff. The stories were there because the structure was there. The structure was very clear what was happening in the game. And so if a team got better, it was because they had done something different, because they had figured something out, because their players improved, whatever. It will be harder to find good storylines this year because the meta is constantly changing, and teams will be constantly changing in how good they are because the meta constantly changes. And this might seem like an issue for me as an analyst, as a caster, rather than you at home, the viewer. But we get hooked in by storylines. That's the whole reason why we try and tell stories of players, stories of teams, is because the story arc speaks to us on a human level. We enjoy stories. Humans enjoy them. You like seeing where a team started, where they finished, their rise, their fall. These kind of classic arcs are entertaining and allow you to empathize and hook onto something and understand it. And I think the more chaos you put into the league, the more the meta shifts around all the time, the harder it is to really figure out what the fuck happened to the Valiant this year. They're expected to be bad. They come in, they're really good, but then the meta changes and they're bad again. Then the meta changes and they're excellent again. Then the meta changes and they're bad again. What is the story there? The meta changes. The story stops being about the team and starts being about the meta. And that isn't an interesting story because it's just a mandate from the developer or a random pick of a name out of a hat. What you really want is teams to be in control of their own destiny, to have observable styles, to be able to speak to you in terms of how they play, and to be able to control whether or not they're good or whether or not they're bad. As for Surefour's tweet, Surefour tweeted about whether the best teams will still be the best teams. He said, "This change won't change who the best teams are. The good teams are the ones with confidence in their play and trust between their teammates. Adaptable players and teams that are able to talk things out together will still be strong. It will only affect our meta teams." I agree with him to a large extent. The really, truly great teams in Overwatch are the teams that are good Sorry, let's phrase this differently, because there's a trap that you can fall into here. When you say the best teams, it can be easy to define the best teams as those who are good from patch to patch. But that isn't the case. The best teams, as far as we normally define it, are just the ones that win a lot. And so, for example, the London Spitfire won the whole championship back in 2018. They were, by a usual definition, the best team of 2018. They weren't the best team of the regular season, and they haven't really done that well from patch to patch, but that's a different, that's a certainly a viable definition for best team. But what I was about to say was, the teams that do win a lot, the Titans, the Shock, the NYXLs of the world, these kind of teams that have good results over the course of an entire season, over the course of multiple seasons, the teams that get deep in playoffs, this kind of stuff, those teams generally do perform well from patch to patch. It's not that we require them to perform well patch to patch. They just happen to, because they're already a good team. That's what Surefour's getting at. If a team is good, they probably are good enough at the fundamentals to be able to handle patch changes. The ones that can't handle patch changes are the ones that were only good because they got a good meta. The place where I disagree with Surefour, though, is that there are a lot of teams that fluctuate wildly based on what meta it is. There have been, like in 2018 when the meta changed and London Spitfire won, like Apex Season 1 where the meta changed and Envious won, Apex Season 4 wasn't really like that, but Apex Season 3 where the meta changed and Lunatic Eye ended up winning. There have been many instances in Overwatch where a meta change has decided which team won the tournament. And so to argue that the best teams will always stay the best teams no matter what the meta is, I think doesn't hold up historically. It does generally, but the boost that a team can get from a meta can sometimes override that and just end up with you winning the championship based on the meta. So there will still be a lot of up and down between the teams, I think. Even though there will be some teams like the Shock, NYXL, Titans, as long as they can avoid the Fisher fallout, and Fusion, probably Atlanta. These teams are probably going to be good no matter what the patch is. They'll still be in the top 10. But there will be other teams that oscillate wildly between top 10 and bottom 10 and top 5 and bottom 5 maybe even from patch to patch. Or from hero pool to hero pool, from weekend to weekend. Hopefully, though, teams will have such little time to be able to figure out what the best compositions are, that teams will have a different idea of what the best compositions are, and teams will have different styles, different compositions that they actually play. That's kind of the best case scenario here, where, okay, Orisa and Batiste and Hanzo and Mei are all unavailable this week, but people's answers to that are all different, because they haven't had time to all scrim each other and figure out what the best answer is. They haven't had that opportunity for natural selection to take its toll and the bad ideas to get weeded out. So a lot of people will come to these matches with a range of ideas, some good, some bad, which I think is going to be very interesting this year. It's inarguable, though, I think, that the level of play will drop. There just isn't enough time to be able to prepare the detail required for the level of play to stay the same. The level of play will definitely drop, but you'll get the excitement instead. Now, as for the effect on the players and coaches, I think it's going to be really stressful. I think the coaches are going to be scrambling. They've got 5 days to try and figure out what the best compositions are to be able to scrim as many teams as they can. You're going to be scrimming in cities that you don't have control over. And when you don't have control over your life, that is the most stressful situation to be in. If you want to burn somebody out, you stop them being in control of their life. You put them into situations where they have no control, and you will find out how quickly people will snap. So that is what I think is a very real concern for teams in 2020, both for the coaches and for the players, is figuring out how they can live with that level of lack of control over their lives. You're not in your home cities a lot of the time, so you're not in your perfect scrim environments. You are desperately trying to scrim whoever you possibly can in order to figure out what the meta is. You're trying to figure out what the meta is. You come into the game, you play whatever you think is best, make the adaptations on the fly, this kind of stuff. I think it's going to be stressful for the players and for the coaches. An interesting question, though, that I'm just going to end on this. An interesting question that I have not heard anybody else ask yet, though, is this going to fuck up the playoffs? Now, the reason that I want to ask this question is balance data for the developers to balance is going to be gathered from the entirety of the season with heroes unavailable. So, for example, in week 1, if Lucio, Genji, Tracer are banned, those heroes are unavailable. The developers are trying to balance to counter whatever meta springs out of that. The next week, if Orisa, May Batiste, and Hanzo are banned, they're now trying to break whatever new meta springs out of that. They are constantly balancing the game without all of the heroes in play. So I think you could make a very reasonable question: is this data even useful to balance from? And once you actually make all of the heroes available again for the mid-season tournament, for playoffs, for the grand finals, isn't that patch going to be really weird and heavily unbalanced because you've been constantly trying to break metas that only exist when certain heroes are unavailable? There's another question here as well. Are they even balancing off the Overwatch League? Are they trying to break the meta that happens in the Overwatch League, or are they trying to break the meta that happens in Ranked? A big question mark when you consider that the heroes banned are probably going to be different. So there are many, many, many different questions to be answered about hero pools. The only way we're really going to tell is by watching. But if you're a viewer that enjoys a little bit of chaos, a bit of cheese comps, some creativity, some hero diversity, you're probably going to enjoy it. If you're the kind of viewer that really enjoyed set strategy, mastery of play, people getting the best that they can possibly be, then you'll probably enjoy it a little bit less. Overall, I think that I hope up until March the 7th, the developers are so active with making meta changing patches that it almost seems superfluous to add hero pools. The perfect world for me would be where the developers are able to make balance changes every 2 weeks that change the meta up anyway in small ways, and it gradually adjusts over time. But I'm all right with a world in which they do that and there are hero pools to make sure that we have a variety in what we watch this year. Because if I have to watch bad teams suck at a single composition for an entire year, then you will find me in the same place as the players and coaches, just losing my mind.